Hey everyone, Pastor BJ here, coming to you from Kirkmont Church. So for those of you that have ever gone to church for any extended period of time, I think you can all be sympathetic to this scenario. The pastor who is preaching way too long, and you who are struggling so mightily to stay awake. He just keeps talking, and you can't remember anything he's saying. Well, today we're going to actually take a look at one of our bizarre verses in the Bible that relates to that, but in many ways is quite different. In fact, you might say fascinating.
Well, fascinating is a word I use for the unexpected.
So, grab your high-octane coffee. Keeps you from falling asleep after all, and let's make this happen. All right, so here's the story as the Bible tells it. So Paul was on his third missionary journey, and he was actually leaving the city of Philippi, which is in modern-day Greece, and he was sailing southeast towards a region known as Troas, which is basically like modern-day Turkey. Anyway, so he shows up there. He plans on spending about a week. He's just kind of coming through and traveling and heading on to other places. And he decides to meet with some of the Christians that were there. And because he was there for just such a short time, they obviously invited him in to preach and to spend time with him. And on one Sunday evening, a very interesting event takes place. Paul meets with the Christians in an upper room. It's like a third-story room in this house. And it said that they were there to worship and to hear Paul preach and to break bread, which is just sort of a reference to the Lord's Supper. Now, Paul was leaving the next day, and so he wanted to just spend as much time with the folks as he could, and so he's preaching, and they eat, and it's getting close to midnight, and Paul is still preaching. He had been preaching for an awful long time. He knew that he might not get to see them for a while, and he just wanted to get a lot of these things to them, to instruct them, and to kind of help them. Well, the reason this story is so bizarre is because of a young man named Eutychus. We don't know exactly how old he was, but probably somewhere between young preteen, teenage age, roughly somewhere in there. And the text also mentions some lamps. And basically what ends up happening is Paul is going on and on and on, and this young man is sitting in a windowsill. So keep in mind, it's not like modern day windows where there's a pane of glass there. It's just an open hole in the room. So he's probably sitting in this hole, and Paul's talking, and the lamps are putting off this oil, and he's sleepy, and he's not old enough to push through. And the short story is that
A most fascinating thing happened.
I'll read from our text. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered, and a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. And, being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms, said, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." And when Paul had gone up and broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them for a long while, until daybreak, and so departed. And they took the youth away alive, and were not a little comforted. All right, so keep in mind, the person writing this story is a physician, Luke, one of the disciples of Paul. And so this poor kid falls out of the window, dies. The physician, most likely Luke was there with him, because he says the we pronoun over and over, assesses that he's dead. Paul comes down, is just devastated by this. And because he is an apostle of the Lord Jesus and is filled with his power, he resurrects this young boy from the dead. And I love the fact that afterwards they're like, okay, so let's go eat. They went on up and took the Lord's Supper, and boy, that's probably quite the memorable worship service to be had for sure. Now, There are two very important lessons that you need to take away from this. The first is, don't fall asleep in church. This is clearly God's way of saying falling asleep in church is sinful and you should... Okay, never mind. I'm just kidding about that. But there's a lesson to pastors. Don't preach so long past... That's also a joke too. Feel free to preach as long as you feel like you need to, pastors. No, the serious lesson to take away from this is, quite honestly, that the Apostle Paul was given the ability to do this because Christ was trying to reveal to him the power in the message of the gospel. And sometimes you get to reveal that in very bizarre ways that are nothing short of...
Please, Spock, do me a favor. And don't say it's fascinating.
No. But it is interesting.